On internet, you will find two kinds of people. One who consider UI as part of UX and another who says UI and UX are separate things. By the end of this video, you will become the third kind, the kind who could empathize with both these people. But you must be wondering what is the right term, UI, UX, UX, UI, UI, UX, UX or product design. Actually, ChatGPT can also answer this question pretty well, but then why this video? Because the answer is not that important, at least not as important to be a separate chapter in a course. Actually, there is a very important lesson beneath the answer which we will cover or uncover in this chapter. And if you ask me, I define myself as UX designer someday UI designer, someday UI UX designer in different context. We will get to that in some time. But let's first understand these two kind of people and their school of thought. One where UI is part of UX and one where UI is different from UX. So let's understand the first school of thought which says UI design is part of UX design. Technically it is correct. So since experience is a broad term which includes everything from things that we sense to thoughts that we think to emotions that we feel, the tangible interface, the screens of the app are just a part of the experience. And since UI design means to design the tangible interface, it's not separate from user experience but part of it. In this school of thought, a UX designer does both planning of an app feature and making the interface of that app feature. And for more details on what a UX designer does, you can check my previous videos. And if you're following the course and like the topic that I'm covering, please consider subscribing to the channel. It would motivate me to create more. There are 36 videos to go, so please subscribe. And now coming back to the second school of thought that treats UI and UX design as separate things, it is theoretically inaccurate but practically useful in certain scenarios. You see, earlier an engineer could both plan and code a product. Then they realized planning can go very deep and could be a job in itself. Thus, product team was created. In product, people realized that design is a job in itself, so a design team was created. In design, some big shot company realized research is a job in itself, so a subdivision, a research team was created. Now UI design also became a job in itself and a UI design was created. Now there is a team that did the work between PO research and UI design. This could have been called planners or strategists or information flow designers or anything, but they were referred to as UX designer for whatever reason. And in this org structure, the work that UX designers do was started to be referred as UX design. So in this case, UX design meant information architecture and user flows. And someone in the team who does both UI and UX is a UI UX designer or a UX/UI designer. These conventions are used interchangeably without much intention or thought behind it. By the way, this type of specialized divisions in big corporate structure is very common. And within this structure, when you call someone as UX designer, you know their specialization is in information architecture and user flows. And if you try to be theoretically accurate here and said UX designer is the person responsible for everything the user senses, feels and thinks, it would not be very practical to understand what exactly the work that the person does as a UX designer in their job. That's why this framework was adopted in many big corporates and it trickled down across the industry. Now we understood two schools of thoughts. Let's see how these terms UI UX, UI UX, product design synchronize with the school of thoughts. So in school of thought 1, where UI is part of UX, UX designer, the term, does both planning and UI design. Product designer is also similar, does both planning and UI design. However, in school of thought 2, where UI is separate from UX, UX designer does only planning, UI designer does only UI design, UI UX designer does both planning and UX design. UX UI designer does both planning and UI design. Now here are two things to note. One is a confusion point. One is a trigger point. The confusion is UX designer, a first school of thought, does UI design. But as per second school of thought, they don't do UI design. And the triggering point is on social media, if you start mentioning UI and UX as separate things, by following the second school of thought, people from first school of thought will be triggered and will start schooling you how UI is part of UX without giving a second thought about your school of thought. So these are the two things to consider: the trigger point, the confusion point. Right now, if you ask me, I am someone who does both planning and UI. So I generally call myself UX designer because that's theoretically accurate. and works in my design circle. However, if I'm in an interview and I feel the person in front of me is from a company like IBM, which follows the second school of thought where UI and UX are different, I prefer saying I am a product designer instead of saying I am a UX designer. Otherwise, they will think I only do planning and not the UI design. So that's one use case. Another use case is whenever I go to NIT Ahmedabad, I don't call myself product designer, because there are product designers who work on physical products. So I go back to saying again that I am a UX designer, or maybe sometimes I would use the term UI UX designer to avoid any form of confusion, right? And while writing online, I use UI UX or UX UI because these keywords have better SEO scores which help my content rank better in Google. So it's all about reading the room and understanding the context, and then using the relevant language to be as clear as possible or take advantage of SEO points. Now, I know what you're thinking. Your designer mind is working towards proposing a solution, and you are thinking, how about we call ourselves digital product designer or digital experience designer or something else? You can try that, but that won't solve the problem that we don't have a standard and an accurate term. What standard is not accurate and what can be more accurate is not going to be standard. These terms actually become popular and get worldwide adoption because of the companies they originate from, like Apple, Microsoft, Google, IBM, etc., which have a very significant design influence all over the world. And if you are thinking 20 years back, one could have stopped this madness of introducing new terms for the same thing, you are wrong. Because right now, also in 2024, as we are shaping the next decade of digital interfaces or the future of design, one big shot company is calling it AR/VR. Another big shot company is calling the same thing mixed reality. Another big shot company is calling it spatial computing. You know exactly the big shots that I'm talking about. And if you could recognize them, please mention that in the comment. But these brand wars are going to cause similar non-standardization for the future as well. And powerless individuals like you and me cannot influence the system. But what we can do is two things that is in our power are we can be smart and we can be empathetic. So be smart about using the terms UX, UI, product design, UI, UX, whatever, as per the context by reading the room. Be flexible in using these two school of thoughts. Don't be rigid ki I belong to this school of thought and I'm not going to entertain any other school of thought. So that's one thing. Point number 2, and the reason for doing this as a separate chapter is here. Don't assume people to be dumb because they don't follow your convention. I want to repeat that again. Don't assume people to be dumb because they don't follow your convention. Try to empathize and understand where they are coming from. If someone says this is UX and this is UI, don't just jump into believing that they are dumb. Maybe they are dumb, but before you react and slam them with your comment on social media, just step back for once and see if they are coming from a place of complete ignorance or from a different school of thought. And that's actually the core lesson of the chapter, which is empathy. Design is not hard science like physics. Rules change with change in context, and empathy helps us adapt to these changing rules. Empathy helps us understand people who are like us, but more importantly, people who are different than us. This is where the journey of understanding of users and the user experience design actually begin. This is it for the video. In the next chapter, we will learn why I believe UX is not a creative job, how to feed the creative hunger when you get bored with UX work, and few necessary skills that we ignore in design courses online. And check this video if you want to know what UX designers actually do at their job. Subscribe if you haven't. We have 36 more chapters to go. Like, share and subscribe. See you in the next one.